This episode of Are We Doomed contains some strong language. Parental discretion is advised. Today on Are We Doomed?
When you go from, there's no way Putin uses nuclear weapons to, holy shit, I don't know, that'll get your attention.
See, swearing. It's someone who's been at the top levels of government describing a nuclear crisis.
We thought that we would never have to deal with this again.
He's not just describing one event, but a problem that's built.
It was like a frog in boiling water.
The problem he's describing is not that we have nuclear weapons. It's that he says we don't have enough anymore. This is Are We Doomed? From Nuanced Tales and distributed by the NPR network. I'm Ben Bradford. Ever since our first episode on nuclear war, I haven't been able to shake the basic absurdity of this whole thing. We have nukes because other countries have nukes. They have nukes because we have nukes. We all point them at each other, so if anyone uses them, we all go down together. I appreciate the communal spirit, but as our nuclear expert Sharon Weiner put it in that episode,
you're threatening to destroy your way of life in the name of saving it.
Also, Sharon offered a radically simple solution.
What do you think is the right number of nuclear weapons for the United States?
Oh, that's easy. That's none.
So easy. That is not the direction we're heading, though. In fact, for the first time in decades, the U.S. is pushing to expand its arsenal. More nukes. New, different kinds of nukes. More. So, today, I want to see if I can be convinced that the U.S. needs more nukes for the world. Can adding nukes actually prevent nuclear war? And in a world increasingly packed with doomsday weapons, can we keep avoiding the one thing they were built to do? We're going to explore the rationale. We're going to hear the point of view of someone who's been involved in the highest level of government in pushing for this direction. There are a couple of reasons Vipin Narang sounds like the wrong guy to talk to. First, his former job title.
I was Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy and Stuff, we called it.
But in Pentagon speak, and stuff can apparently mean the nuclear arsenal.
My direct boss was primarily the space person, and I was mostly brought in to handle the nuclear portfolio.
And then Vipin's job got even bigger.
Ended up as the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy and Stuff.
So he was in one of the front seats for the government steering nuclear policy. Still, that was in the last administration, which has some ideological differences with the current one, except on nuclear buildup, which makes Vipin incredibly helpful here. He can really give us a glimpse of the official view from the inside. The push for more nukes. Vipin tells a story of the past.
I think the story is relatively simple, if, somewhat tragic.
During the Cold War, the U.S. built nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union built nuclear weapons. The two powers competed, jockeying for more.
Then the Soviet Union essentially falls apart. And the idea of great power nuclear competition was, at that point, believed to be, sort of history.
And when you say great power nuclear competition, you're talking about the Cold War buildup, worries of a nuclear strike, needing to be able to deter that with your own nuclear defense, etc.
With a state that has a nuclear arsenal, like sort of on the same level and equivalence to the United States.
With the Cold War over, it left both countries with huge stockpiles, tens of thousands of nuclear weapons apiece, a total explosive power roughly equivalent to being able to repeat Hiroshima and Nagasaki 375,000 times. And nowhere to point them.
We had, through the Cold War, only had to compete with and largely deter just the Soviet Union.
Over a decade, the U.S. and Russia decommissioned more than half their weapons.
Less.
Vipin says we did this thinking the threat was over.
We thought that we would never have to deal with this again. And so after the end of the Cold War, we had the luxury with Russia to focus on reducing the number of nuclear weapons in both of our arsenals. And we were on to, globalization, and then 9/11 happened, and we had the global war on terror. The focus on nuclear weapons was essentially, loose nukes, nuclear terrorism. Like, we worried initially about Iraq getting nuclear weapons and North Korea getting nuclear weapons. And then have we secured all of Russia's and Pakistan's nuclear material?
Meanwhile, the trend of disarming continued. Until Vipin says it reached a hinge point. In 2009, the new U.S. president, Barack Obama, gave a speech.
He committed the United States to, perhaps not in our lifetime, but at least committed the United States to the elimination of nuclear weapons.
Way less nukes.
Was, accompanied by the New START treaty.
Each country, Russia and the United States, agreed to a cap on the number they'd deploy at 1,550. 1,550. Of course, the treaty counts a bomber with 20 weapons as one. We have another 2,000 in reserve, and some weapons don't count at all, among other details. But in the long arc of the Cold War, the promise of less with a vision towards zero was the latest success story. And Vipin hated it.
There was no urgency then, and that's one of the problems.
He says it was short-sighted.
We shut our enterprise down at the end of the Cold War.
He says cutting our weapons left us vulnerable.
We sized it for a world that no longer exists.
Because while the U.S. took weapons offline, other countries began to do more. China.
China, for over half a century, had been very content living with a very small arsenal.
Yeah.
And then sometime in the last decade, Xi Jinping decides that China is going to compete with the U.S. and Russia, and you get this massive transformation in China's nuclear arsenal.
North Korea,
whose nuclear weapons arsenal continues to grow almost as quickly as anybody's in history.
And Russia began to flex its remaining arsenal in new ways
to support their territorial aggression, particularly in places like Ukraine. So Russia's reemergence as sort of a nuclear peer adversary, is like a frog in boiling water. Maybe we should have seen it coming.
Other countries had built, while the U.S. had cut. So the question becomes, in a world where other countries are doing more, what do we do? What is the right way to be safe? Vipin argues the only answer is more. He wants new nukes, different kinds of nukes, and more.
We have to, I think, change our mindset from we're going to keep reducing the size of our arsenal. We're going to, sort of take it easy and there's no urgency to thinking about, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, potentially deploying more nuclear forces than we currently have.
There's a lot of evidence that the country's mindset is shifting to do exactly this. New START, the last non-proliferation treaty, has expired. The agreed limits are gone. The U.S. is planning to spend upwards of $1 trillion upgrading its old nuclear systems. And defense officials, policymakers, and influential voices, including Vipin, are pushing to add more. One group, the Heritage Foundation, has suggested tripling the number of nukes deployed. And what would they all do? The popular image, the one I have in my head, is the start of a post-apocalypse movie. A mushroom cloud balloons from the heart of a city. The movie camera zooms out to a view of cities around the world, similarly gone. Mutually assured destruction. Our current arsenal is already plenty powerful for that. How does more help? But Vipin says that is not predominantly what our nuclear weapons are for, or where they're pointed.
One thing that's helpful for listeners to understand is sort of what do we ask our nuclear arsenal to do?
Vipin says our nukes are largely pointed at other countries' nukes.
There's no question that the U.S. nuclear arsenal is, primarily designed to deter large-scale conventional attack or strategic attack against the U.S. homeland.
AKA lob atomic fire back if lobbed upon. So, with rival nations expanding their arsenals, that means new silos that we don't have nukes ready to point at yet. At this point, there are two logical pathways you could go down. two initial doors to choose from if you're trying to decide whether you're team more nukes or team less. The door to team more says, well, we need to point nukes at those new sites. The other says, what stops those rival countries from just building more too? China is currently building its arsenal to get on par with the US and Russia. If the US expands its arsenal to equal both Russia and China, then those two countries will just expand more. It's more forever. And so that door says the only answer is less.
Less.
But Vipin argues that if we don't build more nukes, if we walk through door number 2, it still leads to more nukes.
A unique responsibility the United States takes on is that its nuclear arsenal must also defend against strategic attack for the allies.
The idea here is that it's our nuclear arsenal doing the work to sort of provide their deterrence.
It's called the nuclear umbrella. Our nukes shield countries so they don't have to have their own.
The U.S. nuclear force must be able to meaningfully limit damage to convince both Moscow and Beijing, but also our allies, that we can fight a war to save them. And that is a very tall order.
Vipin says if allies stop believing the U.S. has enough nukes to fire on their behalf, they'll build. So how do you limit nuclear proliferation? More nukes.
And in my view, it is far better for us to go from 1,550 deployed nuclear weapons to, let's call it 2,000 deployed nuclear weapons, to stop South Korea or Japan or Germany or Poland from trying to pursue nuclear weapons and create all that instability in regions of immense vital interest to the United States.
Can it be this is the only way to prevent more nukes? To build more nukes? The only way to stop this doomsday machine from going off is to make your button even bigger, while enemies make their buttons even bigger, and doing it because you worry if you don't, a whole bunch of other places will add their own buttons? That is the ascendant view right now. And I want to play it out further. If you do build more nukes, do go through that door in this new arms race, as the buttons grow or multiply, how do you stop them from being pressed? How does a believer in that machine think we can ensure it doesn't fire against us? There are two ways for humanity ending nuclear war to start. One, a country's leader decides to fire intentionally. Back in episode 1, we dubbed this the screw it.
That really is a roll of the dice, because once the first nuclear weapon is launched, then you have to wait and see what happens next.
The other way, a country only thinks an enemy is attacking. It fires its nukes back at the imagined threat. Boom, thermonuclear Armageddon. It's an oopsie.
Oopsie.
It sounds ridiculous, but we also know it's almost happened a lot, from oxygen-deprived nuclear submarine officers loading torpedoes to flocks of birds setting off radar detectors. The near oopsie is practically its own genre. But Vipin Narang, former acting assistant secretary of defense, now back at MIT, does not fear the oopsie.
Yeah, I think the oopsie is pretty unlikely.
Vipin just thinks leaders won't take the bait.
I don't think that a president responds to an oopsie. In all of these countries, nuclear weapon states have gone to great lengths to prevent an oopsie. Does that mean it can't happen? Of course not, right? Over time, the probabilities accumulate, and an oopsie is certainly possible. But I certainly think the first pathway is more likely.
The first pathway, as mentioned, the screw it. A country's leader decides to fire intentionally. You're not going to believe how plausible Vipin, our former defense official, thinks this is. There's one specific screw-it scenario he worries about most. Go back to the last nuclear treaty the U.S. signed with Russia in 2010. It was called New START. I told you it capped the number of weapons the countries could have at 1,550 at the ready apiece. But there was an exception.
That is not a completely all-inclusive number, because it does not account for Russia's quote-unquote tactical nuclear weapons. of which Russia has up to 2,000.
And a tactical nuclear weapon is essentially a smaller nuclear weapon, smaller payload. So we're not talking about like blowing up a city. You're talking about blowing up a smaller area.
Correct.
The scenario: a country uses a tactical nuclear weapon, a little baby nuke, against a normal military target, a base, an airfield, a formation of troops. There's no giant mushroom cloud, no city-shattering blast or wave of nuclear fallout painting whole regions of the world with radioactivity. But it is a nuke. And that country has violated the 80-year-old taboo, the one that the whole system of deterrence is for. But just slightly towed past the line. It's still screw it.
Then you have to wait and see what happens next.
What happens next?
A tactical nuclear weapon is pretty widely considered to be able to lead to escalation.
Right. It creates all sorts of policy challenges, all sorts of escalation management challenges.
Does the doomsday machine spin up? It's not theoretical. Just a few years ago, it almost happened. Vipin was at the Pentagon.
In October 2022, 6 months into a war that the Russians thought was going to last 6 days, they faced the risk of Russian army collapse in Kherson. And the Ukrainians had stood up for those 6 months. The Russians were running out of conventional capability,
AKA low on regular weapons.
And there was a real fear that the Russian army would get just put on a platter by the Ukrainians. And if that happened, the collapse of the Russian army for Putin is sort of an existential threat to his regime.
He might get run out. That could get him killed. Makes lobbing one of those baby nukes to shake things up a lot more tempting.
We picked up indications that Putin was very seriously thinking about using some of these small nuclear weapons.
This was a real moment. We heard it was like 50-50.
That's right.
And it was, I remember this. It was a terrifying moment.
It was.
Where it's like everything could change.
And, you know, the intelligence community, when they say 50-50, what they mean is, holy shit, I don't know. That'll get your attention.
What would have happened if Putin fired that nuclear weapon? Would that have pushed the doomsday button? This is an existential question for us. It terrifies me that Russia could still grow desperate enough any time to try a baby nuke as its war in Ukraine drags on. But also, nuclear armed states around the world have invested in tactical nukes because they can envision using them. And Vipin, our insider, thinks eventually someone will.
In the next 30 or so years, 30 or 40 years, I would be shocked if a nuclear weapon is not used intentionally in anger on a battlefield. I mean, I think we're heading in a direction where there are enough actors so that if they're losing on the battlefield, think about Pakistan here, think about Russia, think about China. It could even be the United States if we're losing a war over Taiwan, employs a limited number of small nuclear weapons in order to turn the tide of that war.
I got to tell you, when you say that it's, you think it's, likely that someone's going to use one of these things in the next decades, you feel like that's like a fairly plausible thing. I mean, I just get absolute chills when you say that. That is such a terrifying prospect because it's such an unknown.
What happens next? In our first episode, Sharon Weiner walked us through the nightmare version, which she and other disarmament advocates think could happen.
The logic of controlling escalation is you have to respond with just a little bit more.
The idea is that after the first small nuclear weapon, the other side responds. Maybe not with everything, but enough to punish. But then the first side responds to that. Each step is supposed to be controlled, doing enough for the other to back down. But because of how people respond to crises, shaky hands slam the buttons as the world crashes down.
Decision-making theories suggest that people in a situation like this where they're afraid of losing, they actually double down and they engage in riskier behavior.
A spiral into doom. Vipin is much more optimistic. Same scenario. Putin launches a baby nuke. The US and NATO respond. But Vipin thinks not with a nuke.
there would have been a massive, I would think, conventional or non-nuclear response. Just theoretically, I think the logical target would be the base from which those nuclear weapons came from, so that it would degrade Russia's ability to use more nuclear weapons in Ukraine.
The U.S. would not have used nukes, but it still would have directly attacked Russia.
And then it would be up to Putin to decide whether he would escalate.
Vipin has confidence the countries would ultimately figure it out, step back.
There's, I think, a notion that escalation becomes uncontrollable, but these are smart state actors, including us, including Putin, including Xi, where the idea that, they develop strategies so that escalation is, in fact, potentially controllable.
Here again, two doors. One for team less nukes, and the other for more. Which door you choose depends on how much you trust your government to make good decisions. And not just your government, but China's, Russia's, maybe North Korea's. Vipin, as you've heard, is pretty confident. Maybe that adds optimism. He's been there in the room. As we spoke, though, I found another reason behind his conviction, a more surprising one. The conventional view, the only one I've ever known, is no one wins in a nuclear war. That's the whole grim logic of deterrence. If the nukes ever fly in earnest, everyone's screwed. Camera zooms out, mushroom clouds dot the planet, like in the movies. Nuclear winter hits soon after. See our episode about how to survive nuclear war. But what if there are two doors?
We're going to get into some nuclear theology.
All right.
There are two basic options in terms of nuclear strategy.
The door to less is that conventional view that no one wins. Stay away.
Less.
This concept of mutually assured destruction.
Vipin says that has never been the official plan.
The reality is the U.S. never believed in mutually assured destruction. We always sought to, have a capability that could essentially disarm as many Soviet nuclear weapons as possible.
That's why he wants nukes pointing at other countries' nukes, to blow them up before they launch.
It's called counterforce.
So the door toward more nukes says, what if we can win a nuclear war?
American planners and strategists have thought very hard about and come up with pretty good solutions. We, at the end of the day, have a really sporting chance of disarming them.
Sporting chance.
It's not a foregone conclusion.
But it's a hell of an argument for more nukes. If they really could save us from other nukes, it's the best argument. Nukes. The vaccine for nukes. And Vipin believes it.
Yes, there are nuclear planners and strategists who've been working this problem for 75 years now, have thought of all the challenges of sort of what it would take to potentially disarm the Russians or the Chinese of their nuclear forces.
But see, I mentioned being surprised. First, I don't know how maybe we can win deals with the nuclear winter of it all. Second, there's an argument that if everyone is playing the game of counterforce, everyone's planning to blow up their rivals' nukes before they can launch, and they know their adversaries are playing the same to them, then haven't you just encouraged everyone to fire all they've got at the first hint that they're under attack or they're going to be under attack? What you've created is use it or lose it, which just leads you back to those two doors. Can more nukes give you the win? Or do they just increase the danger?
Less.
In a lot of ways, that debate, all this actually, is the exact same debate that's raged since nuclear war first became a possibility 80 years ago. Do we need more weapons or less? If they're fired, will it end the world or be manageable? Can anyone win? Does thinking you might win add to the danger? It's the same doors with new grease on the hinges. And so, as I was wrapping up with Vipin, I wanted to turn to his view of the past and the future. We have lasted 80 years with these weapons not destroying us. How does he think, in the world of more nukes, we can do 80 more? And what I heard about his optimism went far beyond how we can mitigate the consequences of this invention.
Nuclear weapons are sort of, I call it cure for the cancer of global conventional conflict.
We are hearing the view today for more nukes, which is the prevailing view in our government. And we're hearing it from one of the thought leaders behind this approach, Vipin Narang at MIT. He's presented the argument that nukes are needed, that they make us safer, that we can use them if it comes to it, that even we might be able to win. But I had always figured, whether you were team more or team less or anywhere in between, fundamentally, there was one door everyone went through, that we all saw the technology the same basic way, a sad reality. But Vipin, with some caveats, describes these weapons differently.
Not only have we not had a nuclear weapon used in anger since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we haven't had a great power war in 75 years. And if you look at the first half of the 20th century, it was riddled with great power conflict, hundreds of millions of dead across the globe.
He says, why have we not had another world war? Nukes.
Nuclear weapons are sort of, I call it cure for the cancer of global conventional conflict. They have induced caution in great power interactions and across the globe.
He believes they're still keeping the peace today.
Even in the Ukraine conflict, we see deterrence working. Russia could have gained military advantage by striking supply lines in Poland. But Putin did not, because he knew that striking NATO territory, would cross a red line for the United States and the alliance. And, I think nuclear weapons have a lot to do with that.
Nukes. What can't they do?
It doesn't mean there aren't side effects. And those side effects need to be managed.
Side effects like close calls, arms races, little wee baby nukes, nations jockeying to be able to win on a first strike. All of which I think leads us to a final set of doors that may separate team more and team less. Over the doors, a banner reads, "Where do we go from here?" I think if you believe in disarmament, the vision of a good future is pretty simple. Get rid of the weapons and we don't blow ourselves up.
Less.
What about if you believe? How is that sustainable? Jump ahead not 5 years or 10 years, but 50 years or 100 years. What do you think the nuclear threat looks like under this paradigm?
That's a great question. So what does success look like? And I think that is something we don't ask enough of.
Vipin describes an arc. The U.S. builds, so our allies don't.
Convinces China and Russia that there is no pathway through which continued buildups are in their interest.
So those rivals build for a bit, but then stop.
And we have multilateral sort of arms control, and a nuclear weapon has not been employed.
So we don't have to test whether a baby nuke leads to a doom spiral or whether countries can rationally step back.
That would be success in 25 years.
It's a vision of a world that builds some more nukes, but then stabilizes. It settles into a newer version of the same paradigm we've had of deterrence. What about further into the future? Will countries always have nuclear weapons?
I think it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
Vipin says you cannot uninvent the bomb, even if every country did give up its arsenal.
You've not eliminated the ability and or knowledge to produce nuclear weapons.
So what about further into the future? Do you think that we can keep this paradigm of deterrence forever? Or do you think that global nuclear war is destined to occur eventually?
If the United States is smart and sober about the challenges it faces, and it depends on the leadership in our adversarial countries, can you have deterrence failures? Sure. But the goal is to avoid the big deterrence failure.
Yeah. But I'm asking you your vision of the future under this, what you think is going to happen in your gut. The name of the show is Are We Doomed? I guess I'm asking you if you think we're doomed.
I don't think we're doomed.
You don't think we're doomed?
I don't think we're doomed.
Vipin thinks humanity's survival is not based on phasing out nuclear weapons, but controlling what happens once one is almost inevitably used.
I think we can manage escalation if that were to ever occur, and also ensure that we deter our adversaries from attacking our allies directly in the U.S. homeland directly. I do think that is possible.
Forever.
Yeah. I think there's no alternative. I think at this point it is the least worst alternative. And that's the world we live in, unfortunately.
When you open all the doors to team more, this is where you land. I'm not saying it's wrong. I do think it's bleak. And there are other paths we could try. We heard where team less lands in our first episode, which if you haven't listened, I really recommend. I think it's in conversation with this one. And I don't discount that we might discover other doors that we can't see yet, that may not eliminate nukes, but lead away from deterrence or itchy counterforce trigger fingers. But right now, this is the path as a nation we appear to be walking toward. The path of more. And I think the question is, when you look back at all the doors you opened to get there, do they make sense? A door that says the answer to other nations' more nukes is more nukes. The answer to stop proliferation among allies is more nukes. That you can maybe win a nuclear war if you have more nukes. That the reason for peace in the modern era has been nukes. And that this is the way it has to be. Forever. That's the logic. Do you buy it?